Why was she late on the very first day? The question gnawed at her as the bus hissed to a stop, releasing a puff of exhaust that mingled with the hot Georgia air. Maya gripped the strap of her duffel bag, stepping down into the blinding sunlight. The courtyard of Fort stretched out before her like a punishment waiting to happen. Concrete, steel, unforgiving surfaces that radiated heat like coals underfoot. She was 20 minutes late, not because of anything she did wrong, but because the flight that brought her here, this chance, this crucible, had been delayed 20 minutes and already she could feel it. The eyes, dozens of them, snapping toward her, tracking her every move like predators sizing up the runt in the litter. Well, well, well. The voice cut through the heavy air. A shadow shifted near the barracks, and Sergeant Kane stepped forward. He didn't walk. He prowled, the way a man did who enjoyed breaking people more than he enjoyed food or rest. His face was worn leather stretched over scars, his eyes the cold calculation of someone who didn't see recruits as people, but as fragile glass that he got paid to shatter. Behind him stood 12 men, half-dressed from downtime but now fully alert. Alert in the way men become when fresh blood walks into the arena. They didn't need to know her to start smiling, that little smirk that says this one won't last a week. I presume. Kane circled her like a vulture, boots crunching on gravel, his voice thick with contempt. You're late, and in my world late means dead. Dead means your squad dies, and your squad dying because of you. That makes me your worst nightmare. Yes, Sergeant. The words came steady, though sweat already stung her eyes. I can't hear you. Yes, Sergeant. Kane's coffee-bitter breath filled her nose as he leaned close, inspecting her like a defective weapon. You see these men? He jerked a thumb at the group behind him. They've been here 3 weeks already, 3 weeks of blood, sweat, and tears. They've earned their place, you. You're an experiment, a checkbox on some politician's diversity quota, but don't worry, I'll treat you exactly the same as everyone else. The pause stretched long enough to hurt, then he smiled. Which means I'm going to break you. Laughter, chuckles from the men. She caught sight of the biggest one. Jackson, the name Patch declared, a linebacker's body, arms the size of small trees, and a grin that said he'd never lost a fight in his life, beside him. A wiry recruit with jittering hands fiddled with his gear, Stevens, nervous, sharp-eyed, the kind who thrived when others failed. Drop and give me 50. Kane's voice cracked like a whip. Welcome to Fort. Maya hit the ground without hesitation. Palms slapped the hot concrete, already raw from the unforgiving grit. The push-ups came easy at first. She'd been training for months for this day, her body prepared, but preparation meant little against the Georgia sun. Sweat poured into her eyes by the 20th rep, salt blinding her. The circle around her tightened, voices rose, mock encouragement turned cruel. Come on, sweetheart, you can do it, Jackson barked, his voice all muscle and mockery. Maybe she needs knee pads, Stevens added. The laughter stung harder than the heat. By 30, her arms trembled. By 40, her breath tore ragged. By 49, her palms were bleeding. She forced one more rep, 50. Kane's boot appeared by her face. On your feet, time for the real fun. What followed was less training, more ritual sacrifice. The obstacle course loomed. Rope climbs, wall traversals, mud pits, a gauntlet of pain designed not just to test, but to break. Jackson scaled the rope in seconds, a machine built for war. Even Stevens managed, his nervous energy fueling every handhold. Then Maya. The rope seared her palms. Then before, halfway up, her grip gave, and the world collapsed into mud, breath gone, chest heaving, laughter rained down. Try the kiddie course, someone shouted. Seen grandmothers climb faster, another jeered. Kane's whistle shrieked like death itself. Again. She tried, failed, again, failed. The rope tore blood from her skin again on the 4th attempt. Vision tunneling, muscles screaming, she made it. Grasping the bell at the top with shredded hands, no cheers, no acknowledgement, only Kane's voice, colder than the steel around them. Congratulations. You did in 4 tries what every man here did in 1. The pattern repeated, wall traverse, tire run, mud crawl, each one another reminder. She was prey in a den of wolves by the end. Her body was a tapestry of cuts, bruises, raw skin. That night in the mess hall, she sat alone. The antiseptic stung her palms as she wiped blood from her skin. Across the room, laughter swelled, dissecting her every failure. $20 says she's gone by Friday. I'll give her until Wednesday. She ignored them instead. Her eyes fell to her wrist. The small scar there, faint in the harsh light to anyone else. It was nothing, an old burn, maybe shrapnel, but in the right light it coiled, twisted, a serpent waiting to strike. She flexed her fingers, wrapped her palms again, and in the quiet, alone with her thoughts, Maya allowed herself the smallest of smiles. They had no idea what they were dealing with. The alarm shrieked at 500, dragging her from broken sleep. Her body groaned protest, every bruise singing. Jackson's booming voice filled the barracks. Rise and shine, princess. Time for another day of embarrassing yourself. Laughter, always laughter. Stevens waved a betting slip like a trophy. 3-1 you wash out before Friday. I've got money on Wednesday, don't let me down. She said nothing. She laced her boots, but something was wrong. Her left boot squished damp. She pulled it off. Shaving cream oozed out like toothpaste. The barracks erupted with howls of laughter. Oops, Jackson said, all fake innocence. Kane's whistle cut the chaos. Formation, 5 minutes. Anyone late gets mop duty with me. Maya grabbed her spare boots, ran. She made it to formation with seconds to spare. But Kane saw everything, the mismatched boots, the humiliation written across her silence. Kane growled, "What's wrong with your boots?" "Nothing, Sergeant." "Nothing." His voice dropped low, venom in every word. "You show up to my formation looking like a homeless person and tell me nothing is wrong." The other recruits stood rigid, faces hard, but their eyes glimmered satisfaction, exactly what they'd hoped for. "Drop, give me 100. Her palms screamed with every rep. By the time she reached the armory, her hands were fire. The best rifles were already claimed. She was left with a battered M4 that rattled with age. On the range, the squad advanced in formation. Gunfire cracked. The smell of cordite filling the air. Her moment came. Target in sight. Trigger squeeze, click. Not a bang, a click. Malfunction, she called, protocol automatic. But Kane was already there, voice booming. Of course the weak link fails when it matters. The entire exercise froze, all eyes fell on her. The shame burned worse than the sun. Kane dragged it out, made her disassemble the rifle in front of everyone, hands trembling as she cleared the jam. When the weapon finally worked again, he wasn't done. Since decided to hold up the exercise, she gets the honor of demonstrating proper malfunction procedure. On your belly, low crawl, razor wire move. 100 yards of hell, barbed wire 18 inches from the ground, forcing her into the mud. It tore her uniform, tore her skin, each inch forward another cut. Blood streaked her shoulders. Mud choked her mouth. Behind her, Kane's voice carried like poison. Notice how moves like a wounded animal. This is why standards exist. This is why some people don't belong here. By the time she emerged, she was shredded, bleeding, body on the brink of collapse. Kane smirked, victorious. Congratulations. You've shown everyone how not to handle a malfunction. That night it got worse. Her spare uniform sliced into ribbons, toiletries mixed into a foul paste, her bunk short-sheeted, pillow filled with cream. And in the showers, when she thought she was safe, Jackson, Stevens, and waited, predators, smiles sharp as knives. "About time," Jackson said, blocking her exit. "You've been stinking up the place." She turned on the water-hot relief for a moment. Then Jackson twisted the knob. The spray turned scalding, steam filling the air, skin burning red. She gasped, tried to step back but blocked her path. Stevens laughed. But something shifted inside her. Gone was the fear, gone the uncertainty. In its place, calculation. She looked at each of them, Jackson favoring his left leg from an old football injury, Stevens touching his pocket where his inhaler lived, a scar on his chin. She memorized every detail. "You're right," she whispered, calm. "Maintenance really should fix that." And she reached past Jackson, so smoothly he froze in shock, and shut off the water herself. She walked past them, dripping, leaving wet footprints on tile. At the door she paused. "Thanks for the reminder about equipment maintenance," she said softly. "I'll be sure to pass that along." That night, as she lay in her bunk staring at the ceiling, skin still burning, the barracks breathed easy around her, convinced they'd broken her. They were wrong. In the darkness, Maya flexed her fingers. The scar on her wrist pulsed, faint but alive, like something waiting. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new humiliations. But the mouse had learned its teeth. And soon, the wolves would understand. Why did the alarm sound in the middle of the night? The question tore through every recruit's mind as the shriek cut through their barracks like a blade. Red emergency lights bathed the room in a bloody glow. Shadows stretching across walls, faces pale with sudden fear. Maya jolted awake in her narrow bunk. No hesitation, no confusion. Her body reacted before thought could form, rolling out of bed with a fluid motion that seemed practiced, instinctive around her. Chaos reigned, boots tangled, rifles fumbled. Boys who thought they were men cursed under their breath as the weight of war, even a simulation, crashed down on them. Kane's voice crackled over the intercom, sharp, merciless. "All recruits to the staging area, full combat gear, weapons ready, move your asses. This is not a drill." Jackson froze in the middle of the floor, his size and swagger suddenly useless. "What the hell is happening?" Stevens hissed, fingers trembling as he loaded a magazine. "Another one of Kane's games," Jackson muttered, though his voice wavered. "The bastard loves screwing with us." Maya said nothing. Her movements were too precise, too calm for a recruit who should have been terrified. Boots laced, vest strapped, rifle assembled with mechanical certainty. Every buckle found its place as if guided by muscle memory honed long before Fort. Outside, the night air pressed heavy, humid, the scent of an oncoming storm mingling with the acrid taste of smoke. The staging ground glowed in red light, fog machines rolling artificial clouds across the training course. The obstacle field had transformed into something out of a nightmare. Walls rearranged, shadows engineered for confusion, smoke curling through choke points. Kane stood like a gargoyle, carved from rage and contempt, his voice carried across the night. "Listen up, maggots. Intelligence reports hostile infiltration of a civilian compound. Your mission: navigate the area, neutralize threats, extract the package. Rules of engagement are live fire, miss a target, hit a civilian dummy, or die in the fog. You fail. Any questions?" The recruit stared, wide-eyed, not a word spoken. Kane's gaze found Maya, his sneer widened. "Since you've been such a stellar performer, you get to go first. Try not to embarrass yourself." The laughter came, but it was different now, not as loud, not as confident. Some of them remembered the showers, the way she'd walked away dripping, eyes cold, a shadow of unease clung to the edges of their mockery. Maya stepped to the line, rifle low and ready. The battered M4 felt different tonight. Not clumsy, not foreign, but like an extension of her arm. She closed her eyes briefly, listening, the night, the hum of fog machines, the rhythm of her own breathing. Kane barked the order. "Begin." She vanished. One moment, a woman at the line, the next, gone into the smoke. The recruit strained, squinting, searching for her silhouette, but the fog consumed her like water swallowing a stone. "Where the hell did she go?" Jackson whispered. 30 seconds, the first target popped up, an enemy silhouette. A shot cracked through the night, clean, center mass. The metallic clang echoed, but no one saw where it came from. Another shot, then another, each one perfect. Too perfect, the sound bounced, warped by fog and steel, impossible to place. Stephen swallowed hard. How is she moving that fast? Targets fell, enemy silhouettes crumpled, each with surgical precision. Civilian dummies remained untouched, some tagged with chalk marks. Distinctions made in less than a second. Distinctions recruits with 3 weeks training shouldn't even be able to process. Kane's expression shifted. Gone was the smug certainty. Now, focus, unease. He knew every angle of this course. He designed it to humiliate, to expose weakness. And yet Maya moved through it like she'd memorized every kill zone, every trap. The average recruit took 15 minutes to complete the run, Maya. 8. She emerged from the fog as if she had been sculpted by it, rifle steady, uniform untouched, breathing calm. Silence swallowed the staging area. Kane stared at her. The words slipped out low, almost to himself. "How?" "Training, Sergeant," she replied, her tone even. "What kind of training?" "The kind that keeps you alive." The recruits looked at her differently now, whispers in the darkness. She moved like she could see through the smoke. Those shots, impossible angles. She's not normal. But no one dared say it too loud. Each recruit took their turn, stumbling through the fog, missing targets, hitting civilians, getting tangled in their own panic. None came close to her time. None came close to her accuracy. By the time the course ended, the night had shifted. They had mocked her, laughed at her pain, but now unease crawled under their skin. The mouse wasn't just surviving the wolves, she was circling them. Back in the barracks, whispers followed her. "Remember the showers," Stevens murmured too. "She didn't fight back, she just watched like she was memorizing us." "You think she's planning something?" Voice trembled. Maya slipped past them, her silhouette framed in the dim light. For a heartbeat, her scar caught the glow. A faint coil, a serpent etched in flesh. "Sweet dreams," she said softly, almost tender. That night none of them slept, not really. When Jackson pulled on his boots in the morning, the leather split in half, cut so clean it seemed done by a surgeon's hand. Stevens found his rifle reassembled wrong, useless, his uniform shredded into ribbons, confetti scattered across his bunk. But it wasn't the destruction that shook them. It was the symbols, drawn in dust beside each bed. A serpent coiled, eyes watching, so detailed it seemed alive. They had thought they were the hunters. Now they weren't sure. The storm came the next night. Lightning split the sky, jagged scars across the heavens. Thunder shook the windows. Rain hammered the barracks. Relentless, violent, Maya lay awake, listening not to the storm, to something else. Her instincts whispered danger. At 2:23 hours, the whispers became screams. The first explosion ripped through the compound. Every recruit bolted upright, eyes wide. Emergency klaxons wailed, shrill, panicked. Sergeant Kane's voice cracked over the intercom, this time ragged, strained. "All personnel, this is not a drill, hostile infiltration. Multiple armed intruders breach the perimeter. All recruits remain in barracks until further notice. I repeat, this is not a drill." The barracks erupted. Boys became children again. Jackson, the mountain, stood frozen, breath stuttering. Stevens fumbled his rifle, dove under his bunk like a child hiding from monsters. Through the rain-slashed windows, muzzle flashes lit the night, sharp cracks of automatic fire mixed with thunder. Shouts echoed, foreign words, accents no one recognized. Maya moved, silent, certain, no panic, no hesitation. She slipped from her bunk, past the chaos, eyes sharp at the window. She watched. The formation of the intruders, the way they covered angles, the precision of professionals, Eastern European accents, military-grade weapons. This wasn't random. This wasn't sloppy. This was surgical. 6 hostile, she whispered, voice drowned by storm, coordinated assault. "What did you say?" Stevens called, panic high in his throat. But she was already gone. One moment at the window, the next, disappeared like the shadows had swallowed her. Where the hell did go? Jackson whispered, terror edging every word. Security cameras across Fort flickered later. Investigators would swear the footage had been corrupted, the storm's interference too strong. But those who reviewed it saw something else. Shadows moving where shadows shouldn't, equipment disappearing, footsteps echoing in empty rooms. At 2:27 hours, Camera 7 captured something that shouldn't exist. A fluid shape slipping through a ventilation grate, too smooth to be human, too deliberate to be chance. In the armory, weapons vanished from racks, unseen hands claiming them. In communications, footsteps clicked against tile, but no one appeared on screen. The 6 intruders had taken the command center, hostages herded at gunpoint. Their leader, face, dead eyes, spoke into the radio demands access to training protocols, safe passage, 30 minutes or people start dying. He didn't know, death was already in the walls around him. The first intruder never saw her, posted at the rear entrance, rifle aimed steady, scanning the corridor. Something dropped behind him. A whisper, a shadow, an arm like steel across his throat. No sound, no struggle, darkness, his body lowered gently, quietly. The second monitored communications. His radio died in his hand. He frowned, reached for the spare. Too late, she slid from beneath the console. A serpent striking, one hand snapping his consciousness away. The cameras began failing, one by one, not damaged, disconnected, as if someone was moving through the infrastructure itself. The leader barked into his radio, report, status. Only static answered. By the time emergency power restored half the lights, 4 men were already down, silenced by something that moved like smoke, struck like lightning. 2 remained. The leader's composure cracked, his voice shaking as he shouted, "This is impossible. Who is doing this?" The answer came from above. Maya dropped through the ventilation grate, landing soft, silent, rifle steady. The last 2 intruders spun, weapons up, but she was already moving, liquid speed, impossible angles, bullets carved air. But not her. Seconds later, both men were unconscious, bound by their own gear, hostages free. When backup teams stormed the command center, they found the terrorists stacked like firewood, weapons neatly piled, and Maya, sitting calm in a chair, uniform barely wrinkled. "What happened here?" the team leader demanded. Maya looked up, eyes innocent. "I hid in a supply closet when I came out. They were already like this. Maybe they fought each other." The soldiers exchanged glances. None of it made sense, but was just a struggling recruit, the one who couldn't climb a rope. There had to be another explanation. Yet in the barracks, whispers grew louder. They had heard the gunfire stop, seen the lights flicker out, one by one, watched the impossible unfold in shadows. And when Maya returned, calm, breathing steady, scar glinting faintly under the lights, Jackson Stevens knew. They hadn't been mocking a mouse. They had been cornered by a viper. Why did the colonel come in person? That was the whisper that moved through Fort the morning after the attack. At 600 sharp, a black sedan slid through the mist, its engine cutting the dawn silence. Colonel Harrison stepped out, a man whose reputation carried like thunder, granite features, steel-gray eyes, 30 years of special operations carved into his bones, a chest full of honors he never wore, because men like him didn't need reminders. But that morning his face carried something else, confusion, a shadow of fear. He had spent the night reviewing footage that shouldn't have existed, reading reports that explanation, 6 trained killers, neutralized, hostages, freed, no casualties, and the security feeds. Shadows that moved with intent, a shape slipping through vents, angles of fire that didn't belong to anyone alive. The official report blamed faulty equipment, malfunctions, terrorists turning on each other. Harrison knew better. He had seen patterns like this before. Patterns whispered in blacked-out files, in missions that never officially existed. Sergeant Kane met him at the gate. His usual smug confidence was gone. "Colonel, sir, we weren't expecting." "Where's the footage?" Harrison cut him off, his voice carrying the weight of a man who didn't ask twice. "Sir, the systems malfunctioned, the cameras." "I've seen what survived," Harrison snapped, "briefing room now." 20 minutes later, Harrison sat in darkness, eyes locked on grainy footage looping on the screen. It wasn't clear, distorted by the storm, blurred by interference. But his instincts didn't need clarity. He saw enough. Shadows slipping like water through the corridors, targets falling with surgical precision, cameras winking out as if someone had switched them off, one by one. "Run it again," he ordered. Kane fumbled at the controls, his hands unsteady. "Sir, the official investigation concluded." "The official investigation concluded what it was told to conclude," Harrison said coldly. "But I've seen this before, the movement patterns, the approach, the absence of collateral. This isn't malfunction. This is—" He stopped, his jaw tightened, his pulse quickened. On screen, a figure dropped from a vent, just for a moment, blurred, distorted. But Harrison's trained eye caught what others wouldn't. He leaned closer. "Freeze, Sector 7, zoom." The pixels strained, but there it was, barely visible on the wrist of the silhouette. A mark, small, coiled, dark as night. Harrison's breath caught. His whisper seemed to rattle the room. "Jesus Christ." Kane swallowed, "Sir. That's a black viper mark." The words hit the air like a thunderclap. Kane flinched. The legends. The ghost stories recruits told in hushed whispers. Units that didn't exist. Operators erased from databases. Missions completed by people who shouldn't be alive. The colonel stood, his voice low, dangerous. "I want to see the recruits, all of them, formation 10 minutes." The order rippled through the compound, recruits scrambled into uniforms, nerves still frayed from the attack. By the time Harrison stepped onto the parade ground, 12 stood in line, rigid, eyes forward. They looked like any training squad, nervous, tired, trying too hard. Except one. Maya, third from the left, rifle held with perfect ease, breathing calm, face unreadable, no tremor of fear, no residue of panic. She simply existed, still, patient like a predator disguised as prey. Harrison walked the line slowly, letting silence crush them. He studied posture, breathing, the micro-expressions of the guilty. Jackson's massive hands trembled, just enough for trained eyes to notice. Stevens shifted nervously, darting glances. His jaw worked, clenching and unclenching. Then Maya, she met his gaze without hesitation. Dark eyes holding depths that didn't belong to a recruit 3 weeks into training. He stopped in front of Jackson. "Rough night." "Yes, sir. We followed orders, sir. Stayed in the barracks." "All of you?" Jackson's eyes flicked, just for a second toward Maya, then back. "Yes, sir, all of us." Harrison moved down the line, asking questions, listening to lies wrapped in discipline. Every answer too neat, too consistent, exactly what he expected. When he reached Maya, he paused up close. She was unremarkable, average height, forgettable features, a face designed to disappear in a crowd. But he had learned to see past surfaces, and what he saw made his skin crawl. Her stance wasn't stiff with fear, it was relaxed readiness. The posture of someone for whom combat wasn't theory but instinct, her eyes, too old, too deep. And then he saw it, just visible beneath the cuff of her sleeve. A small scar, dark against pale skin, coiled, twisting, waiting. He reached out, ignoring protocol. His hand closed around her wrist. He pulled back the sleeve, and there it was. The serpent, etched not in ink but in scar tissue, black as death, alive with memory. The parade ground went still. "That's a black viper mark," Harrison said, his voice barely above a whisper, but it carried like thunder across the formation. The effect was instant. Every recruit stiffened, their faces draining of color. Jackson went white as paper. Stevens actually stepped back before catching himself, made a sound that might have been a whimper. Because they all knew the stories, everyone did. The Black Vipers weren't soldiers. They were nightmares. the kind of operators whispered about in combat zones, ghosts who erased entire squads without leaving a trace. And now one stood in front of them. Maya's expression didn't change. She didn't flinch, didn't move. She simply held his gaze, calm as still water. Harrison said, his words measured, "You were in the barracks last night." "Yes, sir." "Didn't see anything unusual." "No, sir, just alarms, gunfire. We stayed put like ordered." The lie rolled smooth, perfect. Harrison released her wrist slowly. His voice dropped, almost inaudible. "How many?" For a moment the mask slipped. What looked back at him was cold, ancient, without mercy. 17 confirmed, she said softly. 3 extractions, 2 deep covers over a year each. The ground seemed to shift beneath his feet. A puzzle he'd been assembling for years clicked into place. Operations that should have failed but hadn't. Targets eliminated with impossible precision. Missions whispered about but never proven. He whispered, the name almost reverent. "Agent Serpent." Her nod was almost imperceptible, but it was enough. The recruits stared, their world collapsing. The woman they had mocked, humiliated, tormented. The one they had called weak, useless, she was legend. She was death wrapped in human skin. Jackson's throat worked, dry, words clawing their way out. You're really..." Maya turned her head. Her smile was sharp as glass. "Hello, Jackson. Did you sleep well last night?" The memory of shredded boots, broken rifles, serpents drawn in dust slammed into him. He stumbled back, fear plain for the first time. Harrison cut the tension. "Sergeant Kane, dismiss the recruits, Agent Serpent and I have a conversation to finish." The squad broke, scattering with wide eyes and stiff steps. None of them dared look her way, none except Jackson, who glanced once more, fear and awe warring in his face, before hurrying away. When they were alone, Harrison studied her, a woman who had just shattered the line between myth and reality. "How long?" he asked. 6 weeks total, 3 weeks active observation. Mission parameters: evaluate training effectiveness, identify vulnerabilities, assess recruit psychology under stress. It made a twisted kind of sense. Send in a ghost to see what surfaces. "And last night," Harrison pressed. Her eyes flickered, something dark behind them. 6 hostiles breached perimeter using inside knowledge. Threat imminent. I acted within mission parameters to neutralize. You broke cover. I preserved the mission. The recruit's safety was paramount." Her words were matter of fact, as if eliminating 6 professionals in the dark was just another day. "Your cover blown now," Harrison said. "By evening the entire base will know." Maya's smile was cold. "Colonel, my cover was blown the moment you said my call sign out loud, but that's not the problem." "Then what is?" She turned, walking toward the horizon, the storm clouds breaking with light. "The real training," she said softly, "is about to begin." And Harrison, a man who had spent decades staring into war's darkest corners, felt something he hadn't in years. A chill. Because the recruits thought they had been learning to be soldiers. But they had been sleeping beside death. Why was the mess hall silent? That was the first thing Maya noticed when she walked in. For weeks, every step she'd taken through Fort had been shadowed by laughter, by whispers sharp as knives. Every stumble, every slip, every failure had been dissected for entertainment. She had been the weak link, the experiment, the joke. Now the silence was suffocating. Conversations died as she passed. Soldiers stared, not with contempt, but with something heavier, reverence, fear, disbelief. Kitchen staff who had barely looked at her before moved quietly, careful not to scrape pans too loud. Even the recruits, her tormentors, her so-called squad, kept their eyes down as though she carried a blade they couldn't see. She sat in her usual place, the far corner table, methodical, calm, spoon lifted, bread torn, each motion precise, deliberate, as if she were eating alone in the wilderness, not under the eyes of an entire base. Jackson walked in first, the man who had laughed the loudest, his shoulders hunched now, swagger stripped away. The mountain looked smaller, every step deliberate, as though the ground beneath him had become a minefield. His gaze found her immediately, and his face, once filled with smug confidence, twisted with memory, every cruel word, every mocking laugh, every moment he'd chosen to crush what he thought was weaker. Stevens followed, tray shaking in his hands. His eyes darted constantly, unable to land on her for more than a second. He remembered the betting slips, the way he'd turned her struggle into a game. He remembered her silence, her patience, her refusal to fight back. Now he knew why. Brought up the rear, pale as parchment. His hand brushed his throat again and again, a nervous tick he couldn't stop. He remembered the showers, the steam, the way her eyes had him like a surgeon preparing a procedure. He had thought himself a wolf. Now he knew he'd been nothing more than a mouse daring to bare its teeth. They sat as far from her as possible, but in the mess hall distance meant nothing. The weight of her presence bent the air, pressing against them. Every glance she gave, brief, quiet, unreadable, was enough to make them flinch. "She's been watching us this whole time," Stevens whispered, so low only his table heard. "Every time we mocked her, every time we hurt her, she was just letting us." Jackson pushed food around his tray, appetite gone. "Those drawings by our bunks, the gear, the serpent." His voice dropped further. "That was her sending a message." "What kind of message?" asked, though he already knew. "That she could kill us any time she wanted," Jackson said softly, "and we never would seen it coming." The truth settled over them like a coffin lid. For weeks they had believed they were the predators, but now they understood they had been mice, and the viper had chosen not to strike. By 1500 hours, the truth had reached every corner of Fort. Colonel Harrison called an emergency assembly. Recruits, sergeants, officers, even the base commander himself. The auditorium was packed, the air thick with anticipation and dread. Harrison stepped to the podium, his presence filling the space like a storm. "Last night," he began, voice steady, cutting through the murmurs, "this base was attacked by 6 armed intruders. These were not amateurs. These were trained professionals, killers with military equipment and inside knowledge of our security." Murmurs rippled, rising into waves. Most knew the base had been attacked, few knew details. "Those 6 men were neutralized," Harrison continued, "with surgical precision, not one hostage lost, not one life taken beyond the enemy." The room fell silent, no one dared to breathe. "And the operator who did this," Harrison's pause stretched long, deliberate, "has been living among us, eating with you, training with you, sleeping in your barracks." The silence deepened into awe. "Agent Serpent," Harrison said, his voice ringing like a hammer on steel, "please stand." Maya rose slowly from her seat in the recruit section. She looked no different than she had yesterday, average, forgettable, the kind of face that disappeared in a crowd. But now they knew. And knowledge changed everything. "Agent Serpent," Harrison announced, "is a Black Viper operative. Her mission here was to evaluate our training and assess our security. Last night, when danger threatened this base, she acted to protect American lives at the cost of her cover." For a long moment no one moved. Then applause began, tentative at first, from the senior officers who understood the magnitude of what they were witnessing. Then stronger, louder, rising, until the entire auditorium stood, clapping for the woman they had once dismissed. Maya stood motionless through it all, her shoulders stiff, her eyes scanning, always scanning. Threat assessment was instinct. Applause irrelevant, gunfire never rattled her, but the roar of hands together felt foreign, almost unbearable. When the noise died, Harrison's voice returned. "Effective immediately, Agent Serpent will take over advanced tactical training for all recruits. Her methods may be unconventional, but I promise you this: you will learn what no manual can teach." The assembly ended, the crowd dispersed, but the shift was permanent. The forgotten recruit had become the center of gravity. That evening in the mess hall, the unthinkable happened. Jackson approached her table, slow, careful, like a man walking toward a loaded weapon with the safety off. "Agent," he stopped, his throat worked, he swallowed. "Maya, I need to apologize." She looked up, calm, quiet. The pause stretched until he thought he might break. "For everything," he continued, his voice rough. "The things we said, the things we didn't know." "You didn't know what I was," Maya said softly, cutting him off. "But you knew what you were doing." Jackson's face flushed. "Yes, ma'am, we did, and there's no excuse." She studied him, dark eyes piercing through the facade. "Tell me, Jackson, what did you learn?" His lips parted, he thought, chose carefully. "That you should never judge someone by appearances." "That's part of it, what else?" He hesitated, then answered with the voice of someone stripped to the bone. "That strength isn't always about size or muscle, that the most dangerous people are often the ones you don't see coming, and that how you treat people when you think they can't fight back says everything about who you really are." Maya's gaze lingered, unreadable, then she nodded. "Good lessons, the question is, what will you do with them?" He lowered his head. For the first time since arriving at Fort, Jackson felt small, not humiliated but humbled. The days that followed remade the base Maya began teaching, not like Cain, whose drills had been built on cruelty and ego. Her lessons were precise, scientific. She taught them to move like shadows, to read weather terrain, silence itself. She taught them how to survive, not as brutes but as thinkers, as hunters, as humans who understood the weight of every decision. Jackson threw himself into her training with a fervor born of shame and hope. The arrogance was gone, replaced by hunger to learn, to be worthy, to redeem. Stevens transformed too. His nervous energy became focus, quick mind absorbing strategies with speed that surprised even him. The betting pools, the jokes, they were forgotten, replaced with an almost scholarly dedication. Even whose cruelty had cut deepest began to change. The smirk vanished. The casual sadism replaced by something quieter, professionalism. For the first time, perhaps, he saw what strength truly was. But the change spread beyond them. Soldiers across the base looked at each other differently, wondering what secrets might lie beneath ordinary faces, what hidden strength might exist in the person they'd overlooked. Maya had shifted the balance without speeches, without anger, without needing to prove anything with words. She simply acted, and the world bent around her. Why was her training so different? That was the question on everyone's mind. The first morning, Agent Serpent took command of the field. The recruits had braced themselves for worse than Cain. If he had broken them with humiliation, what would a black viper do? They expected brutality, endless punishment, impossible drills designed to grind them into dust. But what Maya gave them wasn't cruelty, it was precision. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't bark insults. She didn't waste time reminding them of their failures. Instead, she showed them things they had never been taught, things Cain had never even understood. "Again," she said softly, as Jackson stumbled through a night exercise. "You're moving too heavy. The ground speaks before you do. Listen to it." He tried again, this time planting his steps more carefully. She crouched, pressed her palm to the dirt, and when he moved wrong, she shook her head. Too much weight in the heel, shift forward. Silence is balance. Balance is survival. For hours, she drilled them in silence, making them move through fog, shadows, and forest. No shouted orders, no insults, just corrections, adjustments. The small, razor-edged lessons that made the difference between living and dying when no one else was watching. And it wasn't just physical. In the classroom, she laid maps across the table, but didn't mark them. "Tell me," she said, eyes scanning the recruits, "where would you ambush? Where would you die? Where would you make them think you're weak so you can cut them down when they press?" The recruits leaned forward, pencils scratching, realizing she wasn't teaching them to pass a course. She was teaching them how to think like predators in a world where hesitation meant death. Jackson transformed first. Gone was the swagger, the arrogance. Now he studied every movement she made, every word she spoke. He stayed after drills, repeating steps in the dark until his boots were silent on the gravel. He no longer sought to be the strongest. He sought to be disciplined, precise, deadly in ways he'd never imagined. Stevens followed, his nervous energy turning into something else, quick mind, quick eyes. He learned to anticipate, to see patterns where Cain had made him small. Maya gave him space to grow. Fear, she told him one night as he fumbled through a corridor sweep, isn't weakness, it's information. It tells you when something's wrong. Don't bury it, use it. And Cruel, sharp-eyed, changed in ways no one expected. Under Cain, he had been the worst of them, laughing at pain, feeding on others' weakness. But Maya's presence stripped him bare. Every smirk died on his lips when her eyes found him, because she had memorized him, the scar on his chin, the way his hands lingered too long when cruelty tempted him. She had seen him, and in seeing him had broken the armor he wore. Slowly, awkwardly, he began to shift. The laughter faded, the sneer dissolved. What replaced it was clumsy, uncertain professionalism. Cain hated it. From the sidelines, he watched as the recruits who once fed off humiliation now bent to Maya's lessons, becoming sharper, quieter, stronger. His methods looked crude beside hers, his ego irrelevant, but he couldn't stop it. Colonel Harrison had made it clear. She was in command, and Cain had been demoted to a shadow. The base felt the shift too. Soldiers who once dismissed her now studied her every move. Officers found excuses to linger at her sessions. Even hardened veterans walked softer when she passed. But Maya remained unchanged. She wasn't there for admiration. She wasn't there for their fear. She was there because she had a mission. Every night she returned to her bunk and lay in silence, staring at the ceiling, listening to the base breathe. She remembered the early days, the laughter, the mockery, the hot water burning her skin. She remembered how easily she could broken them then, how tempting it would have been to crush cruelty the moment it showed its teeth. But that wasn't the lesson. Anyone can kill, anyone can destroy. The real power was restraint. The real test was patience, to hold back until the time was right, to act only when action mattered. That was the lesson she carried from the Black Vipers. That was the lesson she would leave with them. Weeks passed. The recruits hardened. They no longer laughed at weakness, because Maya had shown them what strength truly was. They no longer mocked failure, because she had taught them that failure was information. They no longer competed for dominance, because dominance was meaningless when you couldn't hear the blade in the dark. One night during a fog drill, Jackson stumbled again, rifle clattering against a steel pipe. Maya appeared beside him, silent as breath. "Why did they hear you?" she asked. He swallowed. "Because I rushed." "And why did you rush?" "Because I wanted to prove myself." "And what did that give you?" "Noise," he whispered. She nodded once, lesson finished, and he never rushed again. Another time, Stevens froze during a live-fire simulation, panic clawing at his chest. The targets blurred, his breath caught. Cain would screamed, called him weak, broken him further. Maya did none of that. She stepped beside him, steady, calm. "What do you see?" she asked. "Nothing, everything. I can't focus." "Then choose one thing," she said quietly. "Not the whole picture, just one. Start there, control what you can, and when the fear shrinks, move to the next." His hands steadied. His shots found their mark, and when he walked off the range, he carried himself differently, not free of fear, but no longer a prisoner of it. Changed too, during one drill, another recruit stumbled, slowing the group. Cain's voice, sharp from the distance, snapped, "Leave him. He'll get himself killed." But didn't leave him. He grabbed the recruit by the vest, hauled him forward, and dragged him across the finish line. For the first time, he didn't sneer, he didn't laugh, he didn't mock, he simply acted. Maya saw it, said nothing, but in her silence found the approval he had been chasing his whole life. The transformation wasn't loud, it wasn't flashy, but it was real. The recruits who had once mocked her now leaned on her words, not because of fear, but because they understood she wasn't teaching them to win drills, she was teaching them to survive. And survival wasn't about cruelty, it wasn't about ego, it was about clarity, precision, patience. Sometimes, when the drills ended and the night fell quiet, Maya stood at the edge of the field and watched the recruits walk back to their bunks. She saw Jackson laugh. Not mockery this time, but genuine. She saw Stevens carry his rifle steady, fear still there but tempered. She saw walk in silence, shoulders than they had ever been. And she wondered, would they have changed if she had revealed herself sooner? Or did it take cruelty, raw, unfiltered cruelty, to expose who they really were? Did they have to break each other before they could learn to build? The answer never came, but in the quiet, she allowed herself a thought she hadn't in years. Hope. Hope that maybe the world could change, not through force, not through fear, but through lessons that sank deep enough to outlive her. Because Maya knew what few ever learned. Strength wasn't the ability to destroy. Strength was the ability to hold destruction in your hand and choose when not to use it. And in that choice, she saw the recruits becoming something greater than soldiers. She saw them becoming human. Why did the silence feel wrong? That question pulsed through Maya's mind as she stood at the edge of the training field. The recruits were moving through a night drill, Jackson, Stevens, and the rest, their steps quieter now, their eyes sharper. They weren't the same boys who had mocked her in the showers. They were Kane's careless, ego-driven soldiers anymore. They were closer to hunters. But the silence pressing down on the base wasn't the silence of discipline. It was heavier, thicker. It carried weight. She scanned the horizon. The perimeter lights burned steady. But the air carried a static charge she knew too well, the storm before the storm. "Colonel," she said later in the command center, "we're being watched." Harrison studied her. He had learned not to doubt her instincts. "You're certain?" "Certain enough," she said quietly. By 200, the storm broke. Not lightning this time, not weather. A convoy, black SUVs rolling through the dark. Engines cut before they reached the outer perimeter. Figures spilling out, dozens, 50 at least. Armed, organized. The 6 intruders from weeks ago had been a probe. This was the strike. The alarm screamed, the base erupted. Soldiers scrambled to defensive positions. Kane barked orders, but his voice carried no weight now. Every eye turned to the colonel, and every soldier felt a shadow pass when Harrison's gaze shifted toward Maya. She was already moving. The recruits clustered around her. Jackson's chest heaved, breath ragged, Stevens' hands trembled on his rifle. Eyes darted, searching the dark. "What do we do?" Jackson asked. Maya's voice was calm, steady. "What I taught you, nothing more, nothing less." Kane stormed up, fury on his face. "You're going to send these kids into a live fight. They'll be slaughtered." Harrison's voice cut him off. "They've been trained by her, they're ready." Kane stared, disbelief warring with rage. But in his gut, he knew the truth. The recruits he had mocked were sharper now than half the soldiers under his command, and he hated it. The first shots cracked across the perimeter. Muzzle flashes lit the night. Shouts echoed in a language most didn't recognize. The enemy moved with precision. Fast, brutal, coordinated. The recruits froze. Training drills didn't bleed. Training drills didn't scream. Maya crouched low, eyes sweeping the field. Jackson, left flank, cover the approach, slow, silent, remember what silence is. He moved, heavy boots once clumsy now whispered against dirt. His rifle rose. A shadow moved through the fence line. One shot, clean, no wasted breath. Jackson's first kill. His face tightened. But he didn't break. "Stevens," Maya called. "Patterns, watch the lines." He scanned, panic threatening to drown him, but then he remembered, choose one thing, control what you can. He tracked the rhythm of their movement. 2 forward, 1 covering again and again. "They're shifting left," he shouted, his voice cracked, but it was enough. Soldiers pivoted, ready for the flank. She didn't need to give more, he knew. He dragged a wounded soldier from the open, hauling him behind cover with strength that wasn't arrogance this time. It was duty. His hands shook, but he kept moving, shielding the man with his own body as rounds tore dirt around them. The recruits weren't perfect. They stumbled, they hesitated, but they adapted. For every mistake, a lesson surfaced. Jackson slowed his breathing. Stevens trusted his mind instead of drowning in fear, stopped sneering and started acting. And Maya, she didn't take the fight from them. She held her fire, striking only when gaps threatened to collapse, letting them carry the weight of survival themselves. Because this wasn't about proving she could win. She had already proven that. This was about proving that they could. The battle dragged into chaos. The enemy pushed hard, forcing the line back. Kane, red-faced and shouting, tried to rally. But no one listened. They looked to Maya. They followed her recruits. Then came the breaking point. The enemy breached the motor pool, cutting through steel like paper. Vehicles caught fire, smoke billowed. Recruits panicked, some breaking formation. For a moment, it looked like collapse. Maya stepped forward, calm, controlled. She didn't scream. She didn't rage, she whispered. "Remember the fog." The recruits froze. The words hit like a trigger buried deep. The fog, the night drills, the lessons etched into muscle memory. They moved. Not as children, not as bullies, not as broken boys, but as soldiers. Jackson flanked without orders, cutting the breach team from behind. Stevens redirected fire, predicting their advance before it happened, shielded another down recruit, pulling him clear even as bullets chewed the ground. The tide shifted. Not because of Maya's rifle, not because of her legend, but because of the seeds she had planted in their bones. By dawn, the attack was over. Bodies littered the perimeter, vehicles burned. The base stood. But barely, dozens wounded, 5 dead, but the line had held. In the aftermath, silence pressed heavy. Soldiers slumped, exhausted, some cried. Some stared into the dirt. Kane raged about lost equipment, about discipline, about failure. But Harrison ignored him. His eyes were on the recruits, filthy, bruised, shaking, but alive. Alive because they had become something more than what they were. Maya walked among them, quiet, steady. Jackson met her eyes first. His rifle still shook in his hands. He started. "You did what needed to be done," she said softly. His breath shuddered, and for the first time, pride flickered through the fear. Stevens stood apart, hands still trembling. "I almost froze again," he whispered. "But you didn't," she said. "Fear spoke, you listened, that's why you're still here." Sat on the ground, blood streaked across his arms. Not his own, his eyes lifted, searching hers. She gave a single nod. He lowered his head, and for once there was no smirk, no mask, only quiet acceptance. Later, when the dead were carried out, when the fires were finally contained, Harrison stood beside her. "They survived," he said. "They learned," Maya corrected. He studied her profile, the faint scar of the serpent glinting in the early light. "You've given them something Kane never could." "What's that?" she asked. "Humanity," Harrison said. "The kind that survives not by crushing others but by carrying them." She didn't answer, but in her silence there was agreement. Because she knew the truth, cruelty breaks quickly, fear burns fast, but dignity, quiet, relentless dignity, lasts. And now it lived in them. Why did victory feel so much like loss? That was the question no one spoke aloud, as dawn crept over Fort. The smoke from burning vehicles still clawed at the sky, the air stank of cordite and oil. Medics moved quietly, their gloves stained red, their stretchers heavy. For every cheer of survival, there was the silence of the fallen. The recruits sat scattered across the courtyard, faces pale, uniforms torn, eyes distant. They had survived their first real battle. But survival wasn't triumph, survival was a debt, and debts always demanded payment. Jackson sat with his rifle across his knees, staring at nothing. His hands were steady now, but his chest rose and fell too fast, as if he couldn't catch enough air. Stevens crouched beside the motor pool, retching quietly into the dirt, walked in circles, over and over, as though motion alone kept him from unraveling. None of them laughed anymore, not at each other, not at anyone. Kane stormed across the courtyard, his voice sharp enough to cut through grief. "Pathetic, you call that a defense? Half the base is gone, we lost 5 men. 5, and you," he spun on the recruits, spittle flying, "you froze, you stumbled, you let them in. If it weren't for the rest of us, you'd all be corpses." Jackson's head snapped up, anger flashing, but Maya's hand rested on his shoulder, silent, containing, not yet. Kane's rant grew louder, more desperate. He pointed at Stevens. "You were trembling like a child. Useless," he jabbed at, "dragging one man while the rest of us fought to save the base. Weakness." The recruits bowed their heads, but this time it wasn't shame, it was restraint, the kind Maya had carved into them. Colonel Harrison appeared then, his boots striking the ground like a gavel, his voice cut through Kane's fury. "Enough." Kane spun, "Sir, these recruits are a disgrace. They cost us lives, They held the line," Harrison said, his voice calm, final. "They fell apart," Kane roared. "They adapted," Harrison countered. "And when the moment came, they stood. Tell me, Sergeant, where were you when the breach hit the motor pool?" Kane faltered, his mouth opened, closed. He muttered something about coordinating defenses. Harrison's gaze hardened. "I saw who dragged the wounded from fire, who called flanks before they collapsed, who moved when others froze, and it wasn't you." Kane's face reddened, veins bulging in his neck. "You're going to take her word over mine. Some ghost with a scar for a badge. She's manipulating them, She saved this base twice," Harrison said coldly, "and you nearly broke it once." The silence that followed was brutal. Soldiers shifted. Recruits looked up. Kane's power drained away with every second. "You're relieved of duty," Harrison said. Kane's face twisted. He wanted to fight, to scream, to claw back control, but the weight of truth was too heavy. He stormed off, his boots striking like thunder, fading into distance. No one followed. Maya stood still, her face unreadable, but inside there was no satisfaction. Kane wasn't her enemy. He was a mirror of everything she had seen too many times. Men who mistook cruelty for strength, who built their power on humiliation, who believed dominance was survival. She had fought his kind in deserts, in jungles, in cities torn apart by war, and every time they fell. Later that night, when the fires burned low and the base settled into uneasy sleep, Maya walked alone to the edge of the compound. The horizon stretched wide, empty, unforgiving. She stood in silence, her hands resting against the fence, the serpent scar on her wrist catching the moonlight. Ghosts stirred in her memory. Faces, names, missions that had never existed on paper, villages where silence replaced laughter forever, cities where shadows bled into alleys, never to return. 17 confirmed, 3 extractions, 2 deep covers. The numbers were facts, the lives behind them, never spoken of again. But they lived in her still. Every kill, every mission, every time she had chosen restraint when her blood screamed for violence, every time she had broken it when survival demanded otherwise. The recruits saw her as invincible now. The colonel treated her as legend. But she knew better. Legends weren't unbreakable. Legends were the ones who had been broken so many times that they simply stopped counting. She closed her eyes, listening to the quiet. Footsteps approached Jackson. His bulk was smaller in the moonlight, almost uncertain. He stopped a few feet behind her. "I can't sleep," he said softly. She didn't turn. Most soldiers can't after their first fight. His voice cracked. "I killed someone, he dropped right in front of me, and I thought," he swallowed hard, "I thought I'd feel strong, but all I feel is sick." Finally she turned, her eyes steady on him. "Good," she said. He stared. "Good. If it didn't make you sick, Jackson, you'd be lost already. The day killing feels clean is the day you stop being human." He lowered his head, tears he didn't want to show burning his eyes. Then how do you live with it? Her silence stretched long, her gaze drifted to the horizon. You don't, she said finally. You carry it every day. Some nights it breaks you, some nights it teaches you, but it never leaves. It's not supposed to. Jackson wiped his face roughly, embarrassed, but he stood taller. The lesson wasn't comfort, it was truth. Stevens came the next night, pale and restless. What if I freeze again? He asked. You will, Maya answered simply. But you'll know how to move after. Freezing isn't failure, staying frozen is. Followed a week later, quieter than he'd ever been. He didn't ask a question. He just sat beside her in silence, the weight of guilt heavy on his shoulders. She said nothing, because sometimes silence was the only answer. One by one, they came, not as recruits, not as tormentors, but as soldiers trying to make sense of the ghosts they were beginning to carry. And Maya, for all her scars, for all her shadows, listened, because she knew what it meant to walk through darkness alone, and she wouldn't let them do it if she could help it. Colonel Harrison watched from a distance. He saw how they leaned on her, how the broken edges of boys began to shape into men, how cruelty, once their bond, was replaced with something else, something quieter, stronger, respect. She's not just training them, he told a fellow officer one evening. She's remaking them, teaching them what Cain never understood, teaching them what even I forgot. And what's that? The officer asked. That strength without humanity isn't strength at all. It's just another kind of weakness. The days stretched on, the base rebuilt, the recruits hardened, but beneath it all lay the same unspoken truth. They weren't invincible, they were fragile, mortal, changed forever by a single night. And in that fragility, Maya saw something rare, something she hadn't allowed herself in years. Possibility. Because maybe, just maybe, if these broken boys could learn to carry dignity instead of cruelty, then the world wasn't as lost as she once believed. Why did the colonel hesitate? That was the first sign something was different. Orders usually came sharp, clean, without doubt. But this time, when Harrison called the recruits into the briefing room, his voice carried weight, the kind of weight that came from knowing lives hung in the balance. The screen flickered on, grainy surveillance images, a compound tucked into the mountains beyond the border, barbed wire, armed guards, trucks loaded with crates marked in a language most of the recruits couldn't read. But Maya recognized it. Armed shipments, enough firepower to tear through villages, convoys, even bases-like. The colonel's jaw tightened. Intelligence confirms it. The group that attacked us has a hub here. They're moving weapons across 3 countries. If they succeed, every forward unit in this region will bleed. The recruits leaned forward, hearts pounding. They had defended the base. They had survived, but this was different. This wasn't waiting for an attack. This was walking straight into the storm. Harrison's gaze drifted toward Maya. He didn't say it aloud, but everyone knew. This mission wasn't his, it was hers. Maya studied the recruits, her face unreadable. Jackson's jaw clenched, trying to mask the fear behind determination. Stevens scribbled notes, hands shaking, leaned back, eyes narrowed, not with arrogance but with focus. She remembered the first day she met them. Laughter at her expense, cruelty sharp as knives, and she remembered what they had become since. This was their test. Not hers, theirs. That night the convoy rolled out, 2 trucks, lights blacked, engines low. The mountains swallowed them whole, winding roads cutting through darkness. The recruits whispered little. Their nerves filled the silence. Maya rode in the lead truck, eyes fixed ahead, scanning every shadow. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her silence steadied them more than words could. When they reached the ridge overlooking the compound, the plan unfolded with the same precision she had drilled into them. No speeches, no bravado, just actions. Jackson led the breach team, moving low, steady, his size no longer clumsy, but anchored, strong, silent. Stevens handled overwatch, eyes on the scope, whispering adjustments. 2 guards left, pattern repeating every 15 seconds. His fear still lived in his voice, but it no longer ruled him. Flanked with the extraction team, moving sharp, efficient, his cruelty stripped away, leaving something sharper, professional, controlled. The assault began with a whisper, not explosions, not chaos. Silence first, shadows slipping through fences, through cracks, through blind spots only Maya had taught them to see. But silence never lasts. A shout broke, a shot fired, then the compound erupted in violence. For a moment, fear threatened to shatter them. The recruits stumbled, caught between drills and reality. Bullets cut the night. Fire streaked across the sky. Maya's voice whispered over comms, calm, steady. Remember the fog. And just like before, they found themselves. Jackson slammed through a door, taking down 2 guards with precision that would shocked even him months ago. Stevens called flanks, predicting movements before they happened. His voice guiding the team like a thread through chaos, dragged a wounded recruit clear, firing controlled bursts, no smirk, no cruelty, only clarity. The compound began to fall, piece by piece, not because Maya carried it, because they did. She intervened only when the line threatened to break. One strike here, one shot there, a ghost in the dark. Her presence felt more than seen. This wasn't her fight to win, it was theirs. When the final crate was secured, when the last hostile dropped, when silence returned to the mountains, the recruits stood breathing hard, sweat and dust streaking their faces. They were alive, they had done it. Not because they were the strongest, not because they were perfect, but because they had learned. Back at the base, the colonel addressed them in the courtyard. His voice carried pride that was rare in men who had seen too much war. You didn't just survive tonight, he said. You proved something greater, that discipline beats ego, that humanity outlasts cruelty, that strength isn't about who shouts the loudest, but who carries the heaviest weight. Applause rose, but Maya didn't stand in it. She slipped away to the edge of the field, watching from the shadows. She didn't need recognition. She didn't need their cheers. Jackson found her later. His face was tired but steady. We couldn't have done it without you, he said. Her eyes met his. No, she corrected softly. You couldn't have done it without yourselves. He swallowed, nodding slowly. The truth settled into him like weight that no longer crushed but steadied. Stevens came next, offering a shaky smile. I didn't freeze, he said. You listened, she replied. That's all it takes. And the last to approach didn't speak at all. He just held her gaze, gave the smallest nod and walked away. For him, that was enough. That night, as the base settled into uneasy peace, Maya stood alone once more. The serpent scar on her wrist caught the moonlight. A reminder of the path that had brought her here. She thought of the laughter, the cruelty, the humiliation she had endured at the start. She thought of the boys who had mocked her, broken her, tried to erase her, and she thought of what they had become. Not perfect, not unscarred, but different, better. She breathed deep, the night air cold, steady. Because she understood now. Strength was never about how loud you shouted, how cruel you could be, how many you could break beneath you. Strength was patience, restraint, dignity carried quietly, until the moment the world needed it most. And when that moment came, it didn't need to announce itself. It simply acted,